On Monday, I was looking for inspiration, and I turned to the 5-Minute Zen book that I had talked to you guys a lot about quite a while ago, and thought, wow, I hadn't gotten back to this in a while, so let me read a story and see how it takes me. And so I read the story. The story goes like this. There was this town that every year in the fall, the leaves would change and become these gorgeous colors, striking. And people would come from all over, tourists and everything, to come see these colors every year. And then this one year, when it turned October and the nights got shorter and chillier, they didn't turn. They stayed green. So at first, nobody thought much of it until it got later in the month, and they still hadn't turned. They still were the same color. And tourist season was always the same time of year, so tourists came and left because they didn't see the magnificent colors they'd always come to see. The townspeople who usually went out to hang out and look at the colors stopped doing that. There was this one woman who kept saying, you know, nature has its own time. Nature has its own time. Can't force it, can't push it, but nature has its own time. Well, somewhere in November, the rest of the town went back to doing what they normally do, and where this one woman kept going out and going, whenever you're ready, I'm here. Whenever you're ready, I'm here. And then the day came in November where the colors just went bam and were gorgeous, and she was the only one there to see it. And the reflection note at the end was, what are you rushing to change that could change in its own time if you gave it that time? And I loved that lesson. But I'm about to take you on a magical mystery tour. So, ooh, is that me? So I started... So that's where I started, and I started putting a talk together for you guys on how we can let things go at their own time. And then my mind started wandering in the ways that it does, and it said, wait a minute. Sometimes we use waiting as avoiding. How do you know the difference? Sometimes we say, well, we'll give it more time because we're afraid to act. Sometimes we get a clear knowing and we act in perfect and right time. Or sometimes there's anxiety and we act too soon because we're pushing. How do you know? How do you know which one it is? And so I'm like sitting with that. How do you know? How do I know? And I go, well, I always ask that question to myself. What is mine to do now? And I've been very clear that for me, that's how I know. Except, do I? Do I? Do we? And that led me to think about fear. Because now I was having fear around whether I really knew or not. And my relationship to fear, I have found through the years, is rather different than most people's. And I didn't really get it till this week what some of those differences were. So I want to talk to you about that because that's where I got to. I got to the place of what I want you to know today is don't be afraid to be afraid. Don't be afraid to be afraid. And some of you are going, oh, I already know that. And I'm here to tell you, maybe you do. Because we act in all these ways in which we use reasonableness as a cover for fear. We use taking action as a cover for fear. You know, all these things that we talk about that are good things to do could be, maybe not, maybe is a cover for fear. Only you know that for yourself. Only you know whether the times you think are so reasonable is actually you armored, holding back, and trying not to do anything because you're afraid. And so, when I was in my 20s, I went through the Course in Miracles. And I did pretty good. I didn't do all 365. I got a little bit past 300, which isn't bad, right? And the big thing in the Course in Miracles is there's love and there's fear. And it occurred to me this week that that really gives fear a bad rap. If you're going to put it opposite love, it kind of makes it a really bad thing that you don't want. Instead of something that's part of our humanity and is worth loving as well. And so when I was in my 40s, I was sitting in a shaman circle that I got kicked out of for several reasons. One of them is that I was always anxious around this shaman. And he felt it, and he hated having that kind of energy around him. He says, I can't be around a guy who can't relax around me. And I was like constantly on my own case around, why can't I relax around this guy? Why can't I relax around this guy? He's just another guy. But every time I was around him, my heart started beating faster, and I'd feel that anxiety in my body. And it wasn't until one day I finally said to myself, screw it, I'm anxious around this guy. I get to love myself in my anxiety. I get to do that. Because what I realized I was doing was beating myself up. When you ask yourself, why am I like this? That is you not accepting you for who you are. And so I stopped that day doing that. That was my practice. If I caught myself asking myself why I was being a particular way, to then go to, hold on, this means it's a moment to love myself. This means it's a moment to take care of myself in a deeper way. And once I started doing that, I realized that what I'd been doing all my life is not letting fear make my decisions for me from a very early age. That just kind of seemed to come naturally for me. It came so naturally for me that when I, again in my 40s, one day I was with one of my high school buddies, and I was telling him how I had spent all those early years in massive anxiety and massive fear about everything. And he didn't believe me. He said, you always acted so fearless. You always acted like you had no fear at all. What are you talking about? There's no way you could have done what you did with you telling me the level of anxiety and fear you had about those things. And I looked at him and said, it may seem that way to you, but I'm telling you, this was my experience. I was terrified. I just did all that stuff anyway. I realized very young that I can either let fear make my decision for me or not. And that was the thing. And that changed everything. Once I realized I didn't have to let fear make my decision for me. Now, does that mean I've never let fear make my decision for me? I ain't that perfect at anything. Right? But there is a way in which I keep it present for myself. In fact, I have a habit, a practice of when I am feeling fear or anxiety, going in front of the mirror and saying, oh, I have fear. I have anxiety now. It's okay. I can love you anyway. I can love me anyway. That's a practice in the mirror, looking at myself. Now notice I use the words I have fear. I don't use the words I am afraid. I will not own it. Be careful when you use the words I am. Because as soon as you say I am, whatever comes after it, you just owned as you, as opposed to just the weather report at the moment. Because we have this emotional weather report going on, and I don't recommend owning that. It's passing. My fear does pass. And today, I do have less fear than I used to. I am not as anxious as I used to. I'm still get fear. I still have anxiety. Nowhere near the levels I used to. I mean, I used to be so afraid to walk out my door. I could have turned into one of those guys who never left their house. That really could have been me. But it wasn't. And so I keep looking at, how do we know? How do we know? And then I thought to myself, wow, this could really lead to a lot of self-doubt. And then I thought, well, am I afraid of self-doubt? Because then that's a fear too. What's the difference if I have a little self-doubt? Little self-doubt isn't terrible. A lot might be, but not a little, because we want to be able to question ourselves. And so I started looking at all the different ways in which we might be in denial. And maybe you'll relate to some of these, and maybe you won't to others, around whether you actually have fear or not. So I'm taking this trip to Ecuador. My wife has decided once again not to go. So I'm going by myself to a place where they mostly speak Spanish, not English. Country I've never been to. I'm going into the Andes because I love to hike, and I've never hiked the Andes. I love hiking in the mountains. And so I got this whole trip set up, and I am terrified. Because I've been studying Spanish for 3 months, and I'm not really getting anywhere. I'm keeping at it. I'm not giving up. So I have and I got the translator on my phone, and I've done a great job of setting myself up. But here's what I notice. Almost every single person I've said that I'm going to Ecuador to, and mentioned I was terrified, the first thing they say to me is, why? What are you afraid of? If you say that, that is your own anxiety about fear coming out. I'm good with my relationship with fear. Are you? Are you good with your relationship with it? Because if you're not, then it's somehow playing in you in a way you don't even realize. All the things, and so most of us spend a lot of time being afraid of fear, and a lot of it has to do with, well, if we're in fear, that means we're not in love. That's not true. If love is all-encompassing, fear has to be in there too. It has to be a part of it. They're not opposites. If love is all-encompassing, there's no opposite to it. So can we be with our fear? I started writing a song called Screw Fearless. I may or may not ever play it here. Well, I got to finish it first. Then we'll see. But forget fearless. It's irrelevant. In fact, let me tell you something about fearless. If you are fearless, you ain't playing a big enough game. If you're fearless, you are not playing large enough. You know how you know when you're playing large enough? When you're afraid. When you're not sure about how the outcome's going to go and it scares you. Then you know you're playing a big enough game. That's one of the telltale signs. Fearless. And the whole movement, the whole fearless movement is around fear. Right? And so when we get fearful of fear, it's making decisions for us that we're not even aware of. And that's why loving fear is so important. That's why not being afraid of fear is so important, because it is the way in which you get to make sure that now that you're loving it, it's not deciding for you. I've told you guys a story about walking across fire and how there were those who walked across fire to get over their fears. They let fear make the decision for them. Every single one of them got burnt. It's not a good reason to walk. The only reason to walk is because it's yours to do. But to get to where it is yours to do, you got to be willing to just be with the fear, acknowledge the fear, and not let it be part of the decision-making process. But until you acknowledge that it exists, it is. If you're in denial about it, it's making the decision-making process. It's making your decisions for you and you don't even know it. Because fear can show up as clarity. It can show up as certainty. It can show up in any form you can think of if you're in denial that it exists. And so that's the key to it, right? That's what we're looking for. We're looking for a way in which we can notice, is there fear here? And so the first step is ask the question. The second step is notice how quickly you answer it. If your immediate answer is, no way, there's no fear here, then there's fear there. If you actually sit in the possibility of it, the willingness to say, well, maybe, let me sit with this a little longer, let me be sure. Let me not be so quick to judge myself as whether it is or not. Let me not be so quick to think that it's a bad thing if there is. Fear is a great, great pointer. It points you to what you care about. It points you to maybe be a little cautious. Being cautious is not always fear. Sometimes it's smart. But fear is the thing that might get you to be cautious. But you got to really be willing to take a look at the areas in which you think you don't have fear. And like I said, if you don't have fear, you're not playing a big enough game. And so I'm in this role of spiritual leader here. And it's a wild thing to be, I got to tell you, it's just a wild thing to be called spiritual leader. I'm just this guy, right? I'm this guy who's lived a long time, done a lot of things, it occurred to me just today that, you know what, spiritual advisor is a much better word than spiritual leader. Sorry? Because it occurs to me that I can't lead you to anything. I can advise that, this is the way I've seen life. This is how it's unfolded for me. Now it's up to you to do the work of what it is for you. And I noticed that I have a tremendous amount of fear in myself around simply being called spiritual leader. It's not like this comfy place. I don't know if you know that, but there's really nothing comfortable about being called a spiritual leader and the authority that somehow comes along with that in ways that somehow I miss. That really doesn't strike me. And I'm only telling you this because I want you to know that even here, I am completely honest with myself that this is not fear-free. This is not a fear-free zone. I don't know that there is one. And if there was, if I really stood up here fear-free, then I'm not playing a big enough game. And so, and so that's one of the things that happens here is I'm constantly looking at what is the next step? What is the next step for the community? What is the next step for culture change? What is the next step that we can take that scares the crap out of me but may be a good idea? Because that's where the life is. There's something so alive in fear that I think we're quick to dampen, too quick to dampen. And in that dampening, lose the possibility of the aliveness. I love how alive I feel. And so when I look at what I'm afraid of, I'm like, oh, I feel so alive in this. There's something here. There's something here. There's an opportunity here. There's a possibility here for something greater. But when we let fear make the decision for us, instead of use it as a pointer towards that aliveness, then life becomes less armored, tightened, certain. And I have not found a tremendous amount of difference between certain and armored. Closed. If you're certain, it's closed. And so some of you may be asking, well, then where is certainty? Don't we have any certainty? Well, you're going to die. I'm pretty certain of that. And you have this moment now to live. I'm certain of that. We have this moment to live. I find whatever emotions I'm having, fear, love, wonder, mad, I still get to live in that. And I appreciate that because look at the alternative. And so fear is not something to fear. And yet it is built into our society. And until you're willing to really take a look, really dig in, because that's what I found it takes. You really got to dig in to see how many different ways in which society is constantly telling you, don't be afraid. And they're only telling you that because they're afraid. Because people are afraid of fear. But you don't have to be. There's something here that's marvelous. There's something here that can lift us up to something higher. There's the opportunity to rise, to actually be in the aliveness of it. Use it as a pointer for something that can bring you to a place of greatness in yourself. Your fear is your pointer. Don't shy away from it. Dig in. It's your pointer to your greatness. It's right there for you every day. Looking you in the face when you look in the mirror. Just the way it looks me in the face when I'm doing that. And notice whether you're allowing it to support you in rising or whether you're going, I'm not afraid. That's not true for me. I'm not afraid of this at all. I'm just being reasonable. I'm just being discerning. And it's not that reasonable and discerning is bad. It's what is really behind it. And your gut will tell you every time. It's a body thing, like always. Has been for me. Don't be afraid of being afraid. There's something so great in fear that can guide us to greatness. And I know that for each and every one of you. Thank you. I love you.